In the early days of the U.S. media industry, films were made using a studio system. This was an assembly line-like process aimed at churning out many low-cost films to take advantage of the revolutionary and highly popular filmmaking technology of the day. Although this system proved to be quite profitable for studio owners and producers who had almost total control over the process, creative workers, including directors and actors, often had very little control over their own work and were compensated very little compared to film industry executives. Presently, the U.S. media industry has evolved into a star system focused around popular actors and directors. These creative workers are seen as essential to the media-making process and are highly compensated and often wield considerable power in the projects they are involved in and the content that they create. This shift in power has also shifted focus from profitability to the artistic merit of media. Practices are the activities that media professionals do on a daily basis that make up the framework of our media industry. People who perform practices often have a lot of creative control over their work. We refer to this control as agency. Although many creative people have agency in their work, people with more industry power have more circumscribed agency. This is a type of agency which allows media professionals to shape their work environment, which may include more freedom negotiating pay and how they are accommodated while working. Modern-day practices have greatly increased the role of agents in the media industry. Agents are in charge of booking talent for various projects and serve as a mediator between creative workers and executives. In the early days of media production, financing was handled through a patronage system, wherein patrons employed and paid artists they wanted to work with directly. When artists started to become more well-known for their work, market professionals began popping up between patrons and artists to facilitate the commission or selling process. Because there are many media professionals that contribute to the production process, we consider our practices to be of a complex professional era. Creative autonomy is the type of professional autonomy that has changed the most since the early days of media production. Creative autonomy is the ability for creative professionals to exercise their artistic vision without interference. We give much more merit to individuals in the media industry, which has made room for self-expression. Creative autonomy is often affected by where an individual is on the chain of command. Directors have more control over a film than lighting technicians, for instance. Producers and executives sometimes will scrap the creative work of their team if it is not exactly what they want. Digitization has also changed the way media practices are handled. More professionals are needed to mediate the transfer of media through digital means, which further complexifies the network of creative workers involved in the media process. There are often two ways to which media professionals approach the process. Some of them believe in art for art's sake. These individuals often try to have as much control over their work as possible because they are more concerned with the artistic vision. Other media professionals are more concerned with the profitability of the media being produced. They only wish to make art that sells well. Sometimes there are 2 or more creators working on a project, one of which will focus on the creative aspects of the work, while the other focuses on how marketable it is. This helps organize the project and accommodate the needs of media executives.
Industry executive is a general term for the higher-ups that play a necessary role in the creation of media products. It is a general term because the executives include a variety of roles depending on industry. Development and programming executives in television, record executives in music, CEOs in film and video game studios, managing editors in magazine and newspaper industries, and the standards and practices department in television. The people in these roles typically have advanced business degrees. The responsibility of industry executives is to maintain the financial interest of the employer. Industry executives bring in projects that are going to create a profit. They manage people and coordinate funding for projects. They use research to interpret audience desires to keep content moving in the right direction. They need to be knowledgeable about current and upcoming trends. Industry executives work to produce the right content at the right time. A common trend is to remake or replicate something that has been successful in the past. When a trend becomes successful and is replicated many times, audiences become burnt out on the trend. This is the cycle of replication and burnout. Industry executives can be seen as obstructors of creative vision because they do get to offer creative input. They make suggestions about how to make projects more appealing to the employer. No one set of executives is completely responsible for a project. Typically, a set of executives are responsible for one part of the project and then pass it on to the next. The producing executives must approve the products before going on to the Standards and Practices Department to also be assessed. The Standards and Practices Departments make sure that there will be no legal troubles. The meme is making fun of the fact that everything is a remake nowadays, and hardly anything is original, and this is the future. Nielsen Media Research is a television audience measurement company. They used to compete with Arbitron until it became Nielsen Audio. Audience measurement has become more advanced over the years, but is still pretty low-tech. It started out that audiences were asked to send in postcards to radio companies. Then the companies would call people to ask what they were watching or listening to. At one point, audiences were asked to keep diaries for 2 weeks and then send them in. In the 1950s, Nielsen rolled out the instantaneous autometer. This recorded what channels the television was tuned into minute by minute. At first, these needed to be returned to the company. Eventually, advancements allowed these signals to be communicated by telephone line. Next came the people meter. This recorded specifically who was watching by a click on a remote. Up until 2007, only family viewing had been recorded. After this time, individual recording became available by adding college students who came from Nielsen homes, which increased some ratings but still left out huge populations. Next came the portable people meter. This was worn like a beeper and recorded television and audio. The image is of the portable people meter. Television and radio are not the only industries using audience measurement. The magazine industry uses organizations such as the Audit Bureau of Circulation and Business Publications Audit of Circulation to make sure that accurate tracking is occurring. The Nielsen Sound Scale System is used to record music sales. The term platinum in music sales actually means that 1 million copies have been sold to retailers, not to individuals. The film industry tracks weekly box office reports. The National Research Group measures audience awareness and interest. All media industries conduct media or market research. Market research involves media products being brought out at different stages of completion to the targeted demographics for feedback and increased sales. Negative results in market research do not necessarily mean the end of a product. This feedback is mostly used to support executive gut feelings about a project. Negative results do not necessarily mean cancellation. Evidence suggests that market research is more influential today than it was about 30 years ago, but still we know little about how exactly it all ties together. The variety of market research has increased in recent years with technological advancements, pressure to cut costs, and increase profits. There's a lot of data out there about consumers, but it's still unsure how exactly they are using it.
The next section in Chapter 7 is Commercial Influences. This section will cover industry norms, organizational cultures, and circumscribed agency. Commercial influences create industry norms, which affect the various practices and conventions the industry operates on. Some examples for this would be in television, the daily schedule, which defines it by arbitrarily limiting the number of shows available, their length, and how many episodes are created each year. Movies tend to have their opening nights on Fridays. They tend to feature their blockbusters during the summer months, and they typically last between 90 and 180 minutes. The music industry relies on collecting songs into groups to all be released at once, known as albums. Industry lore describes myths regarding what audiences like or don't, and explains how these beliefs come to exist, but they aren't necessarily true. An example of this would be, it was industry lore that white audiences wouldn't watch a comedy show about middle-class, professional African-American families. This was disproven by The Cosby Show in the 1980s, when it became the most watched television show in the US for 5 years. Another example of industry lore being proven false is the idea that men don't buy magazines, which became industry lore in the 1950s after several publications targeted towards men failed. But in the 1980s, it was determined that it was the quality of the content that was the issue, and that men in fact were a desirable audience for magazines. The next section is creativity in an era of change. Creative work within the media industry is in flux due to digitalization. This has allowed for expanded markets, but it has also allowed for tighter control over the practices of creative workers. So they have more potential audience, but they are losing some creative freedom. A solution to a loss of creative freedom are things like crowdfunding websites, such as Kickstarter. These allow for creative workers to create their own content without the need for publishers, studios, labels, or executives. This, combined with the popularization of social media sites, has allowed creatives to cultivate relationships with their fans.
This week for class we had 2 articles to read, both of which were pretty short but had some really valuable information. The first one covered paid social and the second one covered internships. So first we'll be covering the paid social article, and before we get into what paid social is itself, I thought it was helpful to give a bit of background information. So paid social relates heavily to your audience and your branding. So what is your brand? Your brand is really what your customer thinks it is. We can define the brand over and over, but realistically the only definition that matters is whatever our customer gives. And how do you change customers' perception? Well, really you do that through advertising. Obviously each customer will have their own lens that they interpret your advertising through, but that is really our direct route to our customers' interpretation of us. So finally, to get into what paid social is itself, we don't really get a clear definition from the article, but through reading you can kind of figure out that paid social is the information regarding advertisements, including what you click on and what you end up buying from those advertisements from social media websites. That information is really helpful. It can show us what is successful with our customers. It gives us data based on the ads that we actively have running and lets you analyze data that probably wouldn't be available to you otherwise. You can run different ads to see the perception from your customers and test out how they react to them. This is A/B testing, which is defined as splitting an audience of similar profile in equal parts to run different ad variations. So how does paid social relate to your audience and your branding? Well, paid social gives us information. With these tools, we can decide what we want our brand to be and understand how we're influencing our audience through the types of advertisements we're running. Because again, the customer defines your brand rather than you, but you can influence what they think through advertisements. So moving on to the second article, which is something a lot more of us can relate to, it focused mainly on internships. Internships are something that are really heavily pushed upon college students and really emphasized, but it's not exactly all that easy to get. According to the NACE study, 61% of graduating seniors have taken part in some kind of internship program. Only 57% of those were paid. So to me it seems like we should probably be getting money for internships. In the white-collar workforce, unpaid internships have become commonplace. In many fields, including ours, an internship is an important part of finding a job. This is just a quick chart from the NACE study regarding the trends over time for paid versus unpaid internships. These are some memes that I thought related pretty well to the content. So getting back into the article, the majority of the article is personal testimonies, and they're great, but realistically a lot of us are in the same situations that the students were in, so we can relate pretty well and know most of the information already. It can pretty much be summed as people don't really want to pay interns. Interns can sometimes be taken advantage of. It's really hard to manage classes and an unpaid internship plus a job that actually pays you. And once you get an internship, finally, your value goes way up in terms of the market. An interesting inclusion in the article is the reference to the 6-point checklist. It was 6 points at the time, it has since changed to 7. But this is a list regarding the rules versus an unpaid internship as compared to actual employment. And I think it's really useful information for students who are actively looking for internships. For the 7-point checklist, the full points are listed in the slides, but I will just be giving a basic what does this translate to in a quick little sentence. So for the first point, you and the company have to agree and understand that the internship is going to be unpaid. It has to be clearly stated. The second point has to do with what you're doing during the internship and making sure it's relevant and useful given your field or your major. And the third one has to do with either you get class credit or experience, or you get some sort of compensation, so to speak, out of the experience. It's not just you putting in time and you're not getting anything out of it. The fourth point states that the internship has to respect the academic schedule based on your school's calendar, which would be UCF in our case, but it can't act outside of the academic calendar. The fifth point has to do with an unpaid internship can't last an indefinite amount of time. It'd have to be a reasonable amount of time that the student would actually get use out of the experience for. So let's say common would be a semester or a summer. The sixth one has to do with helping employees rather than taking away what they should be doing. You're not there to replace a full-time employee, you're there to enhance what they're doing. And the seventh and final point is the fact that you were not promised a job upon the conclusion of the internship. So you're not working towards this fake goal, so to speak. And using this set of rules, you can analyze the internships you're being offered and understand if you're getting more out of it or if the person who is basically employing you without paying you is getting more out of it. At this point, America has to reach a point culturally where unpaid internships in white-collar fields aren't commonplace, but rather qualified interns are paid so they can attend classes while still getting valuable work experience and maintaining their grades.